A Treatise of Satan's Temptations. Part 2. By Richard Gilpin. A Discourse of the Malice, Power, Cruelty and Diligence of Satan. Chapter 8, Part 3. Of Satan's Third Way to Hinder Peace, by Spiritual Sadness. Wherein, 1. Of the degrees of spiritual sadness. 2. Of the frequency of this trouble, evidenced several ways. Of the difference betwixt God and Satan, in wounding the conscience. 3. Of the solemn occasions of this trouble. 4. The engines by which Satan works spiritual sadness. 1. His sophistry. His topics enumerated and explained. 1. Scriptures perverted. 2. False notions. 3. Misrepresentations of God. 4. Sins, how he aggravates them. 5. Lessening their graces, how he doth that. 2. His second engine, fear, how he forwards his design that way. And when guilt raggeth in an unskilful heart, it must needs create great disquiet. 4th, but most of all when our natural fears are awakened. As when a man hath been under any great conviction, though he be cured of his trouble, yet it usually leaves a weakness in the part, as bruises and maims do in any member of the body, which at the change of weather, or other accidental hurt will renew their old trouble. And then when fresh guilt begins to press hard upon the conscience, not only do the broken bones ache, by the reviving of former fears, but the impressions of his old suspicions, bad conceit of himself, and jealousies of the deceitfulness of his heart, which had then fixed themselves by a deep rooting, do now make him most fearful of entertaining any good thought of himself. So that if any consideration tending to his support be offered, he dare not come near it, suspecting his greatest danger to lie on that hand. These advantages considered, we should not think it strange, that any child of God is driven to spiritual sadness, as some do, but may rather wonder that this is not the common condition of all Christians. 3. Another reason that must be assigned for these troubles is divine dispensation. Such are his children, some so careless, others proud, others stubborn, many presumptuous, that God is forced to correct them by this piece of discipline, and to cure them by casting them into a fever. Others of his children he thus exerciseth for other ends, sometimes to take occasion therefrom of making larger discoveries of his love. Sometimes thereby, preventing them from falling under some grievous miscarriage, or for the trial and exercises of their graces. We may observe, accordingly, that there are 3 sorts of men, that usually have exercises of this kind. 1. Those who at their conversion are either ignorant, melancholy, or were grossly scandalous, are usually brought through, with great fear and sadness. And this is so observable, that by the mistake of men, it is made a general rule that none are converted, but they are under great and frightful apprehensions, of wrath and dismal terrors. This indeed is true of some, but these ordinarily are the scandalous, melancholy, and ignorant sort, though sometimes, God may deal so with others, for who can limit him? Yet are there many whose education hath been good, and their instruction aforehand great, whose conversion is so gradual and insensible, that they are strangers to these troubles of conscience, and profess that if these heights of fear be necessary to conversion, they must be at a loss. Neither can they give an account of the time of their conversion, as others may. 2. Those whose conversion was easy, when after their conversion they miscarry by any great iniquity, they meet with as great a measure of terror and fear, and some think far greater, as those whose new birth was more difficult. David's greatest troubles of soul, came upon him after he began to appear more public in the world. For then he met with many temptations, and great occasions for God's exercising his discipline over him. I believe, when he kept his father's sheep, his songs had more of praises and less of complainings than afterward. It is the opinion of some that God's dealing in this kind of dispensation, even when miscarriage is not the cause, is more sharp usually to those whose conversion hath been most easy. 3. There is another sort of men, to whom God vouchsafes, but seldom and short fits of spiritual joy, as breathing times, betwixt sharp fits of soul trouble, for necessary refreshment and recovery of strength. But the constant course which God holds with them, is to exercise them under fears, while he hides his face from them, and suffer Satan to vex them, by urging his objections against their holiness and integrity. Haman was one of this rank, and the great instance which God hath given in his word, for the support of others, that may be in the same case. For he testifies, Psalm 88, that he suffered the terrors of God almost to distraction, and this from his youth up. It is not fit for us too narrowly to question why God doth thus to his children, seeing his judgments are unsearchable, and his ways past finding out. But we may be sure that God sees this dealing, to be most fit for those that are exercised therewith. It may be to keep pride from them, or to prevent them from falling into some greater inconvenience or sin, unto which he takes notice, of a more than ordinary proneness in their disposition. Or for the benefit of others, who may thereby take notice, what an evil and bitter thing it is to sin against God, and what a malicious adversary they have to deal with. Whoso shall consider these reasons of spiritual sadness, must needs confess, that seeing the advantages, which men give to a malicious devil, to vex their consciences, are so many and great, and the weakness of God's children so hazardous, for the prevention whereof, a wise, careful father, will necessarily be engaged, to exercise his discipline, it cannot be expected but that spiritual troubles should be very frequent among the servants of God. Question. Here it is requisite that I give satisfaction to this query. Seeing that God doth sometime wound the consciences of his children, and that Satan also wounds them, what are the differences betwixt God and Satan in inflicting these wounds? Answer. For the right understanding of this question I shall propound two things. 1. That it is a truth that God doth sometimes wound the consciences of his children. And this 1. Before conversion, but in order to it, as preparatory to that change, men are then in their sins, walking in the vanity of their minds. To translate them from this estate, he awakens the conscience, shows them their iniquities, and the danger of them, that at present they are in their blood, children of wrath, as well as others, and that without Christ, they are miserable. The effect of this must needs be serious consideration, deep thoughts of heart, with some trouble. Only as to the measure and degree there is great difference. God doth not in the particular application of these things to the conscience, tie up himself exactly to the same manner and measure of proceeding, though he keeps still to his general method. Hence is it that some, in regard of God's gentle, leisurely dealing, and the frequent interposure of encouragements are, if compared with the case of others, said to be allured and drawn with cords of love. But others have a remarkable measure of trouble, sharp fits of fear and anguish. And those most commonly are such whose conversion is more quick, and the change visible from one extreme to another, as Paul, when converted in the midst of his persecuting rage, or those whose ignorance or melancholy makes their hopes and comforts inaccessible for the present. These troubles God owns to be the work of his Spirit. The same Spirit, which is a spirit of adoption to the converted, is a spirit of bondage to these, Romans 8:16. And accordingly we find it was so to the converts in Acts 2, who being pricked in their hearts by Peter's sermon, cried out, Men and brethren, what shall we do? The like did the jailer. And the promise which God makes of calling the Jews, Zechariah 12:10, doth express God's purpose of dealing with them in this very method. They shall look upon him whom they have pierced, and shall mourn for him as one that mourneth for his only son, and shall be in bitterness for him, in that day shall be a great mourning. 2. God also sometimes wounds the conscience of his children after conversion, and this he doth to convince and humble them, for some miscarriage which they become guilty of. As when they grow secure, carnally confident of the continuance of their peace, when they are carelessly negligent of duty and the exercises of their graces, when they fall into gross and scandalous sins, or wilfully desert the ways of truth, and in many more cases of like kind. When his children make themselves thus obnoxious to divine displeasure, then God hides his face from them, takes away his Spirit, signifies his anger to their consciences, threatens them with the danger of that condition, from whence follows grief and fear in the hearts of his people. In this manner God expressed his displeasure to David, as his complaints in Psalm 51 do testify. Make me to hear joy and gladness, that the bones which thou hast broken may rejoice. Hide thy face from my sins. Cast me not away from thy presence, and take not thy Holy Spirit from me. Restore unto me the joy of thy salvation, etc. Thanks.